starting in less than a minute. Looks like we have a good connection. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Okay, welcome everyone. Continue on with this long series on Visuddhimagga. And we're starting in a new section of the book today. We're doing chapter 18, which itself it's a fairly short chapter, but it opens a series of chapters now that are closely following the stages of insight. I discussed this in one of the earlier streams. I'll go over it a bit now. The Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, is a highly structured work, and the overall framework of the book follows the system of the stages of insight, of which there are 19 altogether. Sometimes you get a different count. They count them a little differently. This is originally based on Majjhima Nikaya 24, the Relay Coach Sutta, which is very, like many of the suttas, it's very brief and concise, and it lists 7 purifications, and then this has been expanded by the commentaries into 19 stages of insight by subdividing some of the purifications. It's a very useful framework for Vipassana meditators particularly, and if you want to find a clear, lucid explanation, the very best place to go, in my opinion, is Mahasi Sayadaw's Progress of Insight, which is available in electronic form on the Access to Insight website and elsewhere. So if you just search for Mahasi Sayadaw Progress of Insight, you'll easily find it. I've done a very simple table cross-referencing these different systems, which I put the link in at the top of the chat, which you can reference if you wish. What we've dealt with so far has been the first 2 purifications, which are not. Sometimes this is why the count sometimes varies, because sometimes these are not counted as part of the series because they're not insight, they're preliminaries in a way. The first one is a virtue, correcting your sila, and the second one is samadhi, developing meditations like anapanasati. And several chapters in the Visuddhimagga deal with these, which include the 40 meditations. Then the Visuddhimagga had a few chapters that we've just finished that are kind of an intermission, where they're dealing with various abstract technical issues like the dependent origination that don't fit into the scheme of the stages of insight. I think the reason Buddhaghosa did this is that one of his intentions with this book seems to have been that it would be a 1-volume précis or even a encyclopedia of the Theravada teachings. So he wanted it to be very complete, and so he included a few chapters of material that that are important but don't fit neatly into the scheme of the stages of insight. So that out of the way, let's look at this current chapter, which is titled Purification of View, subtitled Discerning Mentality and Materiality, in other words, body and mind. The treatment Buddhaghosa gives of this material can be rather daunting. He makes it much more complicated than it probably needs to be. In his description of materiality, that is body, he goes into various ways of analyzing body, and there's a lot of mention of, without sufficient explanation, I would say, of strange terms, octad, ennead, and decad. That means groups of 8, 9, or 10. This is referencing an Abhidhamma analysis of physical matter, particularly in a living organism, a body of a human being. There are the 4 great elements, and then there are various, which are called the primaries, and then there are various secondaries that group together with them, various qualities like flavor, odor, life faculty, sex faculty, either masculine or feminine, and some others. And these occur in groups of 8, 9, or 10. It's kind of an atomic or theory, and the octads, enneads, and decads are seen as kind of molecules. They're groupings of various smaller units that are required to actually compose matter. Unless you're really interested in that kind of theory, best explanation of this these stages is found in Mahasi Sayadaw, where it's quite clear. To get to the main point of the material, the important thing in this stage is that the meditator, observing the body, particularly a bodily process like the breathing, discerns the difference between the body, the bodily process, and on the other hand, the mind knowing the body. So it's a subject-object distinction, and one realizes that the movement of the body with the breath is one thing, and the knowing of it with the mind is another thing. And this becomes clear at this stage, a distinction between mind and body. And the point of this distinction is to eliminate the sense of a self or an agent. There is only these things, these two things, the known and the knower. There's no third besides. One phrase somewhere in Mahasi Sayadaw puts it, the meditator comes to realize there is just the object and the mind lighting upon the object, and no third besides, third meaning a self. So this is an important stage in the meditation. Now, to get back to Buddhaghosa's treatment, as I said, he gets very much into the weeds of these different definitions of materiality, and then dealing with the mind, mentality. He references in some detail the different types of consciousness that are discussed in chapter 14 on the aggregates, and he uses that the translator, Yanamoli, for reference. He uses the number system that we discussed, that each of these 89 types of consciousness is given a reference number So it makes it kind of easy to refer back from one chapter to another. Then there's actually something that's a bit unusual for Buddhaghosa. He's got beginning with paragraph 15, he's got a few paragraphs on practical and meditation advice. It says, if the immaterial fails to become evident, the meditator might be clear about the body. It sees the process of breathing, for example, but is not clear about the knowing. And he gives some examples. Just as when a man with eyes looks for his reflection of his face in a dirty looking glass but sees no reflection, he does not throw the glass away, but he polishes it again and again until the reflection becomes clear. So the general advice is that the meditator should not give up easily, but just keep observing the process of the breathing again and again until he becomes clear about the knowing. And then he goes on to various different ways in which one can realize the nature of mind. And he distinguishes, three ways of looking that at the problem that will make the mind evident. Contact, that's passa. This is the action referenced in the dependent origination, when consciousness three things are in play. There's the sense organ, consciousness, and the object, and the three of these coming together is contact. And this process might become clear, and this is a way of understanding the mind. Or Vedana, which is feeling. As one of the Satipatthanas is Vedanusati, mindfulness directed towards the feelings. And if one is aware of painful feeling, pleasant feeling, neutral feeling, then this is an immaterial aggregate, and it leads into seeing the whole immaterial nature of mind. And the third one is through consciousness itself. And there's I'll just read this paragraph out. Likewise, to one who discerns in this way, in the head, air is the earth element. It's a characteristic of hardness. In the in-breaths and out-breaths, it is the earth element that is the characteristic of hardness. The consciousness that cognizes the object becomes evident as the consciousness aggregate, and the associated contact and volition formations aggregate. So basically, this is this third way of looking is really cutting to the core. It's getting to the root of the issue. One becomes aware, first of all, of the physical process, and then becomes aware that the breathing itself, or the whatever the physical aspect of body one's looking at, does not have any in itself any consciousness, but it's a separate thing. Consciousness being aware of that. I see in the chat somebody says there's no sound. Is that generally the case? I hope that I've just been talking into the ether. just pause for a moment, see if, please respond in the chat. Sound okay here? Okay, so it's probably on the other end for that fellow. Okay, so I'm getting some more feedback, so we'll just keep going. As I said, this is a fairly short chapter, and the beginning in paragraph 24, he discusses that point that's actually the central value of this insight into discerning between mind and body, is that one realizes there's no self. And he references the simile of the chariot. You know, this is from the Milinda Panya, when King Milinda asked Nagasena, the monk Nagasena, for a simile as to how there is no such thing as self. Nagasena says that you came here in a chariot. If we were to take the chariot apart, you know, here's the axle, here's the wheels, etc. Can you show me in this the essence of chariot? No, there's no such thing. You know, the name chariot is just the designation, a common usage when these parts are put together. So it is with a being, a person, a king or a monk or whoever. They only have this name and designation when the aggregates are assembled in such a way. And then in the paragraph 28, there's a kind of a interesting 29 and 30. There's a kind of interesting discussion in brief of the two wrong views, the annihilation view and the eternity view, and how if one believes in the self, one will always fall into one or the other of these two views. And then the final section of the chapter, he deals with the interdependence of body and mind. How one supports the other in mutual support. In this chapter, he gives in this section he gives the analogy of the cripple and the blind man. You know that there's a cripple who has no use of his legs, and there's a blind man who has no use of his eyes, and they agree to team up, and the cripple sits on the shoulders of the blind man, and the blind man and tells the blind man which way to go and guides him, and the blind man carries him along and moves. So, and he relates this as like body and mind, that the body, the raw materiality of the body has no consciousness, and mind as consciousness has no direct power in the world without using the materiality of the body. I'm not finding it right now, but I remember when I read when I looked at this in preparation. There's also a reference here that comes up elsewhere as well, seeing the point of relation of mind to body is the heart, and this was a common idea in the ancient world, and is still I think held by many. Most of us moderns tend to think if there's a point of special contact between body and mind, it's the brain, but in the ancient world it was thought to be the heart. Okay, so I'll end the discussion there. Like I said, this is a fairly brief chapter. It's an important concept, and if you want to understand these stages of insight, you're a good companion source to this work, and it's actually deals with things fairly briefly. It's not a long read. Is Mahasi Sayadaw's Progressive Insight. It's a very excellent book. And I'll continue on next week with the next chapter. The next stage is purification by overcoming doubt, and it deals with a few different topics of Dhamma. So we'll stop there, and I'll have a look at the chat and see what. Give me a moment to get this legible. Okay. The Lord Buddha has said that the view of their self is wrong, and having no self is also wrong. Can you explain how having no self is wrong? How does this tie into the concept of anatta? I don't think the Buddha said that the view of no self is wrong. I'm trying to remember. There is a sutta where it could possibly be interpreted that way, but it's not. That's not what he was. That was definitely not the intention. Next question, Bhante. In Buddhist cosmology, there is a realm of being mind only without physicality. Yes. If they were to take away all sensory inputs to the brain, would there still be mind? Would this be similar to Brahman of that concept? Yes, that there is a realm in the Buddhist cosmology, the arupa beings, beginning with boundless space, boundless consciousness, nothingness, neither perception or non-perception. And these are beings that have no physical form whatsoever. They're called four aggregate beings because the rupa kanda, the body aggregate, is not present. So there's the idea in Buddhist cosmology that mind can exist without body. And we say body and mind are mutually supportive and dependent. This is a general rule in most conditions, but there is this special case that mind exists without any bodily basis or connection whatsoever, just pure mind. So it's quite difficult for us to even imagine such an existence. Because, for example, you can't place them anywhere in space, because space and location are products of the rupa kanda, the material aggregate. So that these beings are in nowhere or you can't say they're anywhere or nowhere. They have no relation to space. They're just pure mind. So they wouldn't have any sensory input other than the mindsets. So they wouldn't have, they don't have, obviously, if they don't have a body, they don't have ears, eyes, and so on. Next question, is the separation of mind and body that important as an insight knowledge? Is it for the deconstruction of self to show the separation? Are there other sections of the Siddhi Magga other than the jhanas that disagree with the suttas? Okay, that's two separate questions. Yeah, the separation of mind and body is important as an insight knowledge. Yeah, that's the point of this stage of insight, which is a relatively early stage in the process. One becomes aware of the difference between the breathing and, for example, if that's the object, the difference between the breathing and the knowing of the breathing. They're two separate things. And then this leads to a nullification of the self-concept, because it's seen as not needed. There's the breathing, and there's the knowing of the breathing, and there's no third thing going on. Are there other sections of the Visuddhimagga than the jhanas that disagree with the suttas? There are probably some small disagreements here and there. I can't think offhand of any major doctrinal difference. Okay, and now this one's referencing back about the self question. It's in the Patipada Sutta. I don't remember that one as well, but I don't want to comment on it at the moment. If one can get into first jhana regularly through anapanasati, is there a point of doing the other meditation objects, such as asubha or four elements, whereas anapanasati is the goal of stream entry? No, anapanasati would be sufficient, but you might take up those other elements for specific purposes. For asubha, if you experience a lot of sensual desire, you pick up some asubha meditation to quiet that down. But certainly there's no, if you can access jhana in anapanasati, there's no reason to change practice. Purification of view sounds appealing, yet it is paradox. To appreciate something is impure, one must have a more pure view, yet impure view will cause a blind spot of what is impure. Advice. Yeah, well, it's a gradual process. The purification of the view. It's not like it switches on all at once. So yes, when the view is impure, it's going to inherently have delusion and ignorance as a result. But those diminish as the view is purified. In your time in Asia, have you heard or experienced stories of encounters with Nagas, Devas, Supanas? Yeah, many stories. It's very common, and you hear all kinds of stories in Thailand. Okay, a long one over several comments is referencing the story of the man who spoke to the Buddha. He was on a journey to find the Buddha, and he shared a dwelling overnight with what he thought was another monk, and it turns out that was actually the Buddha. And then he went. He wanted to ordain, and the Buddha told him to go into town and get a bowl. And when he went outside, he was killed by a bull. Can you give me tips on which sutta I can read this story? I don't recall the source of that. It is a story from the suttas. It's not in the commentaries. I believe it's in the Majjhima Nikaya, but I'm not sure. I don't recall. Okay. Let's see. No, someone's asking for a Dewa story. I could, there's a kind of a one I like in Ajahn Mun's biography. Talks about a Thai monk, who made a pilgrimage to India. He crossed through Burma, and he was in the uninhabited forest. And he'd been a few days without food, and he was feeling weak and tired. and he sat down someplace to rest, and a man appeared coming around from behind a tree, carrying a dish of food, and the man was dressed in the clothing of a Burmese nobleman from 300 years before. And he brought this tray of food and offered it to the monk. Then he went back behind the tree and was never seen again. Okay, last question. We'll stop for today. When you are in first jhana, is it best to just sit back and let things happen, or actually move the piti and sukha and suffuse the body with it? I think general rule is better not to interfere too much, to just allow the process to happen. I don't think you have to be 100% rigorous with that. You can, if you can encourage the piti to flow, that can be helpful. Okay, so we'll leave that for today, and next week we're doing chapter 19, Purification by Overcoming Doubt.